Welcome to Cheap Talk, the podcast that dives deep into life's everyday puzzles. And today we're tackling a big one, living together.
Ooh, cohabitation. A relationship milestone, a potential minefield. So much to unpack there.
Exactly. It's that classic double-edged sword. Some couples thrive, others, well, let's just say things get complicated.
Right? You hear those stories. We were so in love, then we moved in together, and suddenly.
Disaster. So what's the secret sauce? Why do some couples get closer while others drift apart?
Well, this article we came across, it highlights something really interesting. The living room? Apparently, happy couples prioritize spending time together in their living rooms.
The living room? Huh. I wouldn't have thought. I always figured the bedroom was the key relationship space.
Nope, not according to this research. They interviewed couples, and those who got along well spent lots of time in the living room, connecting, talking.
So it's not just being in the same apartment, it's how you share that space, specifically the living room.
It seems that way. And, it makes a certain amount of sense. It's the common area, a neutral ground where you can relax, chat, do activities together.
Yeah. Not necessarily the place where you're, recharging after a long day.
Huh, true. Though having a relaxing, comfortable living room could contribute to that too. Less stress at home, less stress on the relationship.
Good point. I mean, think about it. If your living room is a disaster, a source of constant arguments, the negativity spills over.
Oh, absolutely. Where's the remote? Whose turn is it to vacuum? Those little things can become major irritants.
Totally. And suddenly your home becomes this battleground instead of a sanctuary.
So, a happy living room, a happy relationship? Is it really that simple?
Well, it's definitely a piece of the puzzle. This article goes deeper into the specifics, talking about everything from clean floors to furniture choices.
Oh, interesting. What kind of furniture makes for a happy living room?
So we were talking about happy living rooms, right? And this article dives into some really specific details, like who knew clean floors were so important?
Right? It sounds almost too basic. But they interviewed couples, and it turns out a clean living room actually reduces stress.
Which makes total sense. I mean, if you're coming home to a messy, chaotic space, it's hard to relax and connect with your partner. It's like, where do you even begin?
Exactly. You walk in, and it's like, boom, instant tension. Whose socks are these? Why didn't you take out the trash?
Ugh, I could feel the stress just thinking about it. It's like that study they mentioned, the one from the University of Connecticut. When people are stressed, they crave a clean environment. It's a control thing, apparently.
Oh, interesting. So a clean living room gives you a sense of order in the chaos.
Yeah, exactly. And that spills over into the relationship. Less stress at home, less stress with each other, which is a fantastic point. This reminds me of the environmental stress theory. A messy environment stresses you out, and then bam, you snap at your partner.
It's like the living room becomes this breathing ground for arguments instead of a place to unwind.
Totally. And get this, apparently taking your shoes off and going barefoot in the living room can also make a difference.
Barefoot? Really? How so?
Well, they talk about this whole thing about connecting with nature, like how in Japan, people are often barefoot at home.
Oh, yeah? That's interesting. Almost like grounding yourself.
Yeah. Plus, physically, it stimulates the nerves in your feet, which can be relaxing. It's all connected, right? The physical and the mental.
Huh. I never thought about it that way. So, clean floors, barefoot living. What else?
Okay, so this is where it gets a little designy. Apparently, the height of your furniture matters.
The height? Now that's a new one. What's the deal with furniture height? Too tall, too short? What's the sweet spot?
So we're talking furniture height, yeah? And how it impacts relationships. This article brings up a fascinating connection to personal space, citing Hall's work from the 60s. Apparently, a living room with a clear view, not cluttered with tall furniture, can actually ease social discomfort. It's all about meeting that need for personal space, even when you're sharing the room.
Oh, that's interesting. So, lower furniture, more open space, less awkwardness. Like, I can see how feeling cramped might make you tense.
Exactly. And speaking of tension, they then go on to talk about cushions. Like, the softness of the furniture matters too.
Cushions? Okay, how does that fit in?
Well, they suggest softer cushions encourage more physical touch, which, as we've discussed before, boosts oxytocin, that bonding hormone. It's like you're subconsciously drawn to cuddle up on a comfy couch, right?
Right. Makes sense. Hard, uncomfortable furniture, not exactly conducive to snuggling. You end up perched on opposite ends of the sofa like strangers in a waiting room.
Ha, exactly. They even quote some couples talking about this, like, our sofa's so hard we can't even cuddle without hurting ourselves. Or we just have two separate chairs we barely touch except when we're sleeping. It's sad, really.
It is. So those high-backed individual armchairs, relationship killers, basically?
Well, they can be. They create this physical and emotional distance, plus, they're not very flexible posture wise. The article references this architect, Kurokawa Masayuki, who talks about how chairs should allow for muscle tension and release. That shift between sitting upright and relaxing back.
Yeah, yeah. Like you need to be able to really sink in and get comfy. So, what's the alternative? Beanbag chairs? Floor cushions?
Exactly. They suggest those kinds of things because they allow for more freedom of movement. You can shift, adjust, get closer. It's less formal, more intimate.
Okay, so low furniture, soft cushions, anything else?
Oh, yes, this is important. They emphasize having something in the living room that draws your attention together, like a focal point.
Hmm. A focal point? Like what?
Like a TV, a projector, a gaming console, even a pet. Something that gives you shared experiences, something to talk about.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about how you sit, but also what you do while you're sitting there.
Exactly. They cite YouGov research showing that lack of shared topics is a top reason for breakups. And if you're just sitting in silence, scrolling on your phones, well, that's not exactly building a connection.
True. So these shared activities, they provide a starting point for conversation, a way to connect. They're talking about positive resonance here, those moments of shared joy and connection that strengthen a relationship.
Precisely. They mentioned psychologist Barbara Fredrickson's work on this. Those shared positive moments, they're crucial for long-term relationship health. So, movie night, game night, it's not just about the activity itself, it's about the shared experience, the positive emotions you're experiencing together.
Makes a lot of sense. So comfortable furniture, shared activities. What's the catch?
There's a catch, yeah? Well, it's not so much a catch as a balancing act, I guess. The article talks about how too much togetherness in the living room can also be a problem, suffocating, a loss of individuality.
Oh, right, right. Like you need your own space too. It can't all be about shared experiences.
Exactly. They mention B's 2009 research on the living room, how it needs to cater to both private and public aspects of life. Sometimes you want to connect, sometimes you want to be alone, even in the same room.
Yeah, yeah, like reading a book in the corner while your partner's watching TV, that kind of peaceful coexistence.
Precisely. It's about respecting each other's need for solitude, even within a shared space. They even talk about how creating different zones within the living room can help, like a reading nook, a workspace, a place for hobbies.
Oh, that's a good idea. So it's not about turning the living room into this constant hub of interaction. It's about creating a space that can accommodate both connection and individuality.
Exactly. And get this, they link this back to stress too. Like, if you feel trapped in a constant state of togetherness, it can actually increase stress, which is the opposite of what you want.
Right? Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. It's like that study from 2015 on anxiety and ritualized behavior. Sometimes when we're stressed, we crave those little rituals of solitude, those moments of just being with ourselves. It's a coping mechanism.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And the living room ideally should provide space for that too. It's not just about shared activities, it's about creating a space where everyone feels comfortable, whether they're interacting or just being. Which, brings us to another point, aesthetics.
Aesthetics? Okay, how does that fit in?
Well, the article references Grinstein, Hochvet, and Cronrod's 2019 work on how visuals impact empathy and prosocial behavior. Basically, a visually pleasing living room can foster positive emotions, which in turn promotes empathy and connection.
Oh, interesting. So a beautiful space makes you a nicer person?
Well, it can certainly contribute. Like, if you're surrounded by things you love, things that make you feel good, you're more likely to be in a good mood, more open to connecting with your partner. It's all connected, the physical space and the emotional state.
Makes sense. And then there's Kim, Seo, Bei, and Han's work from 2024. What did they have to say about this?
So, aesthetics, right? It's not just about having a pretty living room, it's about creating a space that reflects your shared values, your shared vibe.
Yeah, yeah. Like if you're both minimalist, a cluttered living room is going to create tension, regardless of how comfy the couch is.
Exactly. They talk about how visual clutter can be a major source of stress. It's distracting, overwhelming, and it can make it harder to connect with your partner. Like, you're both physically in the room, but mentally you're somewhere else, lost in the chaos.
Right. It's like that saying, a cluttered space, a cluttered mind. It makes totally sense. And speaking of minds, this article then pivots to something totally unexpected: barefoot living in the living room.
Barefoot living? Wait, what? How did we go from furniture to feet?
I know, right? It's a bit of a leap. But they tie it back to this whole idea of stress reduction, citing a 2015 study on anxiety and ritualized behavior.
Oh, interesting. So going barefoot is a ritual?
Well, it can be like taking your shoes off at the door. It's a way of leaving the outside world behind, creating a sense of sanctuary. It helps with the mental transition from work mode to home mode.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. Like, it's a symbolic act. It's also about claiming ownership of your space. They also cite Keller and Wilson's biophilia hypothesis here.
Biophilia? What's that about?
It's this innate human desire to connect with nature. And walking barefoot, even indoors, can tap into that. It's like bringing a little bit of the outdoors in, which I guess can be relaxing. Plus, they cite a study from the Korean Journal of Physiology and Pharmacology that linked barefoot walking to improved cognitive function in adolescence.
Oh, wow. So barefoot living, it's good for the mind and the relationship? Who knew?
Right? It's all connected. And get this, they even suggest designating a specific barefoot zone in your living room.
A barefoot zone? Seriously? Like a shag rug or something?
Yeah, or even just a designated area where shoes are off limits. It creates this sense of intentionality. It's like this is our relaxing space. This is where we connect with each other and with ourselves.
Interesting. So it's about creating these little pockets of peace within the living room, which I guess ties back to that whole idea of balancing togetherness and individuality. So to wrap this all up, what's the takeaway here? Is there a magic formula for a happy living room?
So we were talking about happy living rooms and how they tie into happy relationships, right? And this whole thing about aesthetics, it's fascinating how it all connects.
It is. Like, who knew the color of your walls could impact your love life?
Right? But it's not just about color, it's about the whole vibe of the room. Grinstein, Hogvet, and Cronrod's 2019 work really dives into this, how visuals impact empathy and prosocial behavior. It's like if your living room is a source of stress visually, it's going to impact how you interact with your partner.
Yeah. Like, if one of you is a minimalist and the other is a maximalist, that's going to create some friction no matter how much you love each other.
Totally. And Kim, Co, Bay, and Han's research from 2024 gets into this, how the living room needs to reflect your shared values. It's not just about creating a space that looks good, it's about creating a space that feels good, a space that reflects who you are as a couple.
So it's about finding that balance, right, between individual preferences and shared aesthetics.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. The article then talks about how these shared aesthetics tie into something called positive resonance.
Positive resonance? What's that?
It's this feeling of connection, of shared joy that you experience with your partner. And Levinson and Fredrickson's 2022 research on long-term married couples highlights just how crucial this is for relationship health. They saw this link between relationship quality and various factors associated with health and longevity.
Oh, interesting. So a happy living room can actually contribute to a longer, healthier life?
Well, it's all connected, right? The physical space, the emotional connection, the overall well-being. It goes back to that idea we talked about earlier about the impact of a clean and organized living room.
Right. It's all about reducing stress and creating a space where you can truly relax and connect, which I guess makes you more open to experiencing those moments of positive resonance.
Exactly. And that's why, having those shared activities, those shared experiences in the living room is so important. It goes back to YouGov's research. It's about having things to talk about, things to connect over.
Yeah, like movie nights, game nights, even just sitting and chatting. It's about creating those opportunities for positive interaction. But what about those times when you don't want to interact? Like, what if you just want to be alone, even when you're in the same room?
That's a great question. And the article actually addresses that. It talks about B's research from 2009 that showed how the living room needs to cater to both the public and private aspects of life. It's about balancing togetherness with individuality. It's not realistic to think you'll always be together with your partner in a shared space.
So, how do you create that balance? Like, practically speaking, how do you design a living room that accommodates both connection and solitude?
Well, they talk about creating different zones within the living room, like a reading nook, a workspace, a place for hobbies. It's about giving each person their own little sanctuary, a place where they can retreat and recharge.
That makes a lot of sense. So, it's not about turning the living room into this constant hub of interaction. It's about creating a space that can flex, a space that can adapt to different needs, different moods, Which kind of brings us back to the power dynamics. If one person dominates the room, the other person is always in a less than ideal position, right? So we have to be mindful of that. Corner and Schutz discuss that sort of dynamic too.
So, we were talking about how the living room can impact relationships, right? And this article, wow, it really dives deep. It even brings up power dynamics, like if one person dominates the living room.
Oh, yeah? Like hogging the remote, always choosing what to watch?
Exactly. Or, having their stuff everywhere, making it their space, not ours. It creates this imbalance, right? And Corder and Schwartz's work really gets into that, how it can lead to resentment, conflict.
Yeah, yeah. It's like that whole thing about territoriality, marking your territory, even within a shared space. It can be subtle, but it definitely impacts the dynamic.
Totally. And speaking of subtle, get this, they talk about how even the placement of furniture can play a role in these power dynamics.
Furniture placement? Okay. How so?
Well, like who gets the best seat? Who controls the flow of conversation? It's all connected. They cite Summers' work from way back in '69, talking about how spatial arrangements can influence social interaction. Like if the couch is facing the window and one person always sits with their back to it.
Oh, I see. Like they're literally and figuratively in a less powerful position. They can't see what's going on. They're excluded from the view.
Exactly. It's fascinating, really. And it ties back to that whole idea of creating a space that feels equitable, a space where everyone feels comfortable and respected.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's not just about what's in the living room, it's about how it's arranged and how that arrangement impacts the relationship dynamic.
Precisely. And they even link this to attachment theory. You know, how secure attachment fosters a sense of safety and trust, which then allows for more flexibility in these spatial arrangements. It's like if you feel secure in the relationship, you're less likely to get hung up on who gets the best seat.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's all interconnected, right? The physical space, the emotional dynamic, the attachment style. It's like this complex ecosystem.
Exactly. And you know what? This whole conversation has really made me think about my own living room. I might need to rearrange some furniture. So, as we wrap up this episode of Cheap Talk, we want to leave you with this thought. Take a look at your living room. What does it say about your relationship? Is it a sanctuary, a battleground, or something in between?
Great question. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends, family, roommates, and, well, anyone who shares a living room with you. We'll see you next time on Cheap Talk.